A country or a person that is rudderless does not have a clear aim or a strong leader to follow. What happens to such a country? Do its people riot, take to the streets? Do its cities burn? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Bongani Bingwa. In assessing 25 years of democracy, tonight we focus on leadership. What is it? Where is it most sorely needed? And what does it take to provide it? Is it political only? What about communities, schools, businesses, religious spaces, and the home? The ability to influence people, their thinking and behavior. It's also the power to change history. That's what it takes to move a society from apartheid to democracy. So in the same manner, we saw stalwarts challenging apartheid's control. 25 years into our new country, what does effective leadership look like today? The attacks of the past 2 weeks, from looting to xenophobia to horrific gender-based violence. Who has been the voice of reason for you? Who has displayed leadership? And that brings us then to our poll question tonight. We're asking, do we have a leadership crisis in South Africa? You can choose from our three standard colors: green for yes, yellow for maybe, red for no. You can also interact with our poll topic on Facebook and Twitter. Remember to use the hashtags SABCDG25 and hashtag SABC News. And of course, you're welcome to send us your WhatsApp videos to 066-479-8056. Our producer, Lindiwe Mabena, met 71-year-old Mam Elda Khadebe, who shared her brand of leadership with us.
American singer and actress Dolly Parton once said, "If your actions create a legacy that inspires others to dream more and become more, then you are an excellent leader." Living that sentiment is Mam Elda Khadebe. Born in the Eastern Cape and raised by her grandmother after her father died, the 71-year-old has embraced democracy and all the opportunities it's brought for her. The veteran nurse and go-getter also boasts an administration degree and an MBA. She's now based in Johannesburg, but has work experience in Saudi Arabia and the UK.
When I was working there, I learned to deal with the medical doctors and orientating them. With employment issue, I will be called for interviewing. And then I felt, I'm comfortable.
She also challenged the head of the hospital she worked in to start training local nurses, as the country was using health workers from other countries.
I said, who's going to look after your people? If we all evacuated, we'll run. Go back to our homes. There's war. Iraq is next door. So what are we going to do? And he said, I don't know. I said, so bring your girls to be trained as nurses, so that when we run away, they remain to look after your own people. They did that. And the process we called Saudization, making females to work.
She returned to South Africa 12 years later and worked for the Department of Health. It was at this time she conceived the idea to use her skill and expertise to start a business to assist the country's already strained healthcare system. About 83,000 undocumented patients access clinics in Johannesburg alone.
Before I give medication, I go in length to teach these people. The government doesn't have that time.
One of her patients, Mam Nompumelelo, says the clinic is a breath of fresh air. It helps us a lot, as we get more than what we get at the clinic. It's also affordable, even to us as pensioners. Mbulelo Mesachwa has been working for Mam Khadebe since the clinic opened in 2016, and she mentors him to take charge of his destiny.
ukuthi namele push and do what I have to do.
She has taught me to push hard and do what I have to do business-wise. And now I am starting my own business.
While citizens debate the quality of leadership South Africa has and deserves, people like Umam Khatebe are proof that South Africa could become a much better place if the privileged and those who are benefiting from the democratic dispensation could use whatever they have to close the gaps they see in their communities. I'm Lindy Mabena in Devland Extension 27, Johannesburg.
And thank you for that report, Lindiwe Mabena. Now, joining the conversation is Busisiwe Mavuso, the Chief Executive Officer at Business Leadership South Africa. Welcome to the Democracy Gauge, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Bonga.
Define leadership for me.
You know, leadership for me is simply about just having three things, Bongan. It is about having a compelling vision, it is about having integrity, and it is about having courage. If you don't possess any of those three, then you shouldn't be calling yourself a leader. So you have to have a view in terms of what the end goal and the long goal should be. You should actually have, integrity and be able to act, beyond reproach. And of course, you should have courage. If there's decisions that you're not going to be able to make as a leader, then you don't actually fit the category of being a leader.
So you have to have a plan, you have to have the personality and the integrity to put that plan in the best interest of the people that you lead, and then you have to be strong enough to do it.
Absolutely.
So those are things that we could say make a good leader. What makes a bad leader?
If you don't have that, you don't qualify to be a leader, right? So I think leadership that doesn't have, and I think maybe leadership is about public good. Let's get that first and foremost. It is not about self, but it's about ensuring that the decisions that you make are actually going to benefit those that you're leading. Because remember, a big characterization of leadership is about followership. If you don't have followership, then you are not a leader.
Sure,
right?
but you can be a charismatic person. You can be somebody who can inspire lots of people to follow you, but not necessarily for the public good.
Absolutely. So, and I think that is the issue, that if it's not for the public good, then you're probably not acting in the best interest of the people, and therefore, you don't have integrity. So if you don't have integrity, then you don't qualify to be a leader.
We're going to look at leadership from various aspects here, but let's start with the political. I mean, I don't need to tell you what the last 2 weeks have been like in South Africa.
Absolutely.
And yet, for many people observing what's happened both in the country and outside, they would say it took a really long time for the leadership in this country to make clear what was happening and what they're going to do about it.
Absolutely. And that is absolutely true. You see, leadership is also about leading from the front, first and foremost, right? And I think where we find ourselves as a country, from a political perspective, we need political leadership that is going to be decisive. We need political leadership that is going to be courageous. We need the political leadership that is actually going to make the decisions that ought to be made, the tough decisions. Because you see, the business of government, which is political leadership, is precisely about making the tough decisions. It is not about being collaborative all the time, because if you are going to try and seek consensus, and I think the key thing for me, Bongane, is about understanding where you are, at that time. It is about context.
Reading
it is about
the moment.
Right? It is about being a leader of your time, right? It is about working with this toolbox and understanding which tool do I need to pull from my toolbox given what opportunity. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all, and I think that is what I see, happening from a political perspective.
Explain to me how we moved, say, last week to women protesters in Cape Town at the World Economic Forum meeting that was happening there, being dealt with water cannons, to the same protesters the very next day being addressed by the president of the country. What's going on there? It seems we're not sure, we're flat-footed, we're not sure how to deal with situations like that protest.
And I think for me, the first thing would have been, how did you even get there in the first place? How did we even find ourselves where so many women actually had found it fit to actually come to West Africa to actually say, we are going to disrupt this event because there are things that should be happening in this country that are not happening. And the big issue for me that those women were demonstrating about, it is about consequence management. You see, there is something to be said about discipline in a country. You know, there is something to be said about providing leadership, you know, and discipline and leadership seem like such exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. So South Africa currently lacks discipline, and this political leadership is just failing to instill that discipline. So people found it necessary to say, you are actually going to, you know, have to make this big demonstration for us to be listened to, and it cannot be.
So you're all about business, you're all about leadership. How did all those scenes play out to international visitors? How did all those scenes play out to the very investors we need to get this economy to provide for all its people?
You know, it actually, a big part of the conversations we had at WEF Africa, for instance, was precisely about that, right? A big part of it about condemning what was happening in the country. But someone said something very interesting. Someone said, you know, Africa is what it is because its leadership is not what it should be. He said, Africa is actually suffering from leadership deficit at the moment. If we were in charge, you know, as a continent, if we were in charge as a country, then this wouldn't be happening. But something very interesting as well. Someone said, if you allow the two economies, one nation, you know, to perpetuate to the extent that it has perpetuated, then, you know, things like this are bound to manifest themselves in this shape and form.
And therefore that tells me it's easy enough to blame the politicians, but where else is leadership lacking at the moment?
You know, I think from a business perspective, we have not done enough as well, Bongani. If we had, then I think the trust deficit that currently exists between business and labor, business and government, and business and civil society wouldn't be. You know, the lack of transformation within organizations wouldn't be if business had actually, so for the longest time, the business of business had just been business, and it cannot be, because we operate in this same environment, so we've got an obligation, you know, to ensure, you know, that we therefore provide leadership from a socio-economic perspective as well. Let's agree that business has got the disproportionate resources and therefore the disproportionate voice and disproportionate power, so they've got the ability to can move this economy along towards a particular direction. But for the longest time, business has just taken a back step. But you see, this is where political leadership also comes in. Through macroeconomic policy, Bongani, you force business to do certain things. You force the country to go in a particular direction so that all can benefit. But for the longest time, business has been left to its own devices. When it comes to transformation, it has been left to the goodwill of business to happen. And that is why it hasn't happened. And that is why people are so angry at the moment.
Okay, we're going to try and unpack all of that in terms of what you mean. We'll continue the conversation. Stay with us, because after the break, we're also going to be gauging your views on whether you think we have a leadership crisis in our country. Stay tuned. Welcome back. It's all about you here on the Democracy Gauge. So the People's View allows you to interact with us to tell us what you have to say. Here's our best video so far.
Revolutionary greetings to all the South Africans. South Africans, actually, we don't have a leadership crisis in the country. The only crisis that we have entrisms. So for us to deal with these entrisms, I think the South African Communist Party should take charge of running the country. Thank you, South Africans.
Well, that's certainly one view. We'll continue the conversation with Busisiwe Mavuso, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Business Leadership South Africa. I mean, you just heard that video there, and although it would be easy to dismiss it and maybe even mock it, but the essence of it comes from exactly what you were saying about the unsustainability of our economic fundamentals.
Absolutely.
Our economy cannot continue to work only for the few.
It cannot be. And I think in a country where you have more than 50% of your citizens that are living in abject poverty, Bongani, it's not sustainable. You know, if we want to grow this economy, if we want this economy to flourish, the model that we should be building towards is that of having a strong middle class, like 80% middle class. So this, you know, have and have-nots, you know, the disparities and the gap, you know, between the haves and have-nots is just too huge, you know, for this economy to be sustainable. And I think it cannot cannot be.
Here's the thing, we often talk about this economy as though somebody else was in charge.
Yeah.
Every time there's a criticism
Yeah.
about how our structure operates,
Yeah.
it's as if
Yeah.
we've just awakened
Yeah.
to this fact, as
Yeah.
if we didn't know.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if 25 years
Yeah.
into our democracy, this is where we find ourselves, whose failure is that?
So it is a function of two things. It is a function of political failure and a function of business failure. So as I said earlier on, it is the business of government to ensure that the macroeconomic policies that we have in this country move this economy towards a particular direction. But for whatever reason, they left it to the goodwill of business to actually do the right things. You see,
But business
conditions
can
for
turn around
people...
and say, but with all the corruption that we have seen, with all the statements that are anti-business, why on earth should they get involved? What stake do they have in this project when they are the ones who are often vilified?
You see, business is not doing anyone a favor when it does the right things. It is manifestly within our interest as business to ensure that the society within which we operate is a prosperous society. Because think about it, Bongani, if we operate in a society that is not prosperous, then where are our markets supposed to come from? If you operate in a society where more than 50% of the population, lives in abject poverty, then they don't have disposable income. If they don't have disposable income, they can't walk into our shops to buy goods and services. If they can't walk into a shop, then you can't supply. If you can't supply, then demand. You know what I'm saying? So
Sure.
it's just a vicious circle.
But here's
so
what happens.
business needs to ensure that this happens.
But as you and I both know, when the paw hits the fan, the rich just leave. And that's what many of them have been doing and are doing now.
And I think that is precisely what is happening. So I think the past 10 years also have been a huge setback for the country, right? And I think estimates are saying that we've lost about 500 billion in the past, 10 years, and about 2.5 million jobs, is the opportunity cost of what could have been created. And I actually look at that 10 years and I said it was not government only, business was also complicit in this.
Here's the thing, you've got these, sides divided, digging in, fighting in the trenches, fighting each other, talking past each other, shouting at each other. Surely, at some point, we must all come together. The trade unions have a role to play. Civil society has a role to play.
We all have a role to play, but you see, this needs to be a coordinated effort. Someone needs to take leadership to say that what are you going to do as business? What are you going to do as labor? What are you going to do as civil society? And what is it that I'm going to do as government? And I actually see that being the role of government. So business has to ensure that more people are brought into the economic mainstream. And the way to do that, in my view, in this climate, Bongani, is through SMMEs. We need to open up our value chains as business, for black SMMEs so that we can ensure that we start changing the economic trajectory in this country. Labor cannot be sitting where it's sitting, where the economy of this country has not reached 2% for the past 7 years and they demand 11% increases. That cannot be. They too have a role to play. They can't actually be saying business, you're not doing enough, government, you're not doing enough. What is their role going to be? Civil society also have to take ownership. I'm worried about what the political leadership has created in this country. It is a crisis of dependency and therefore a nation of beggars. That is actually going to, no one owes civil society anything. We just owe them opportunities and that's it. And I think that actually is going to have to come out strongly.
When we fought against apartheid, everyone got involved.
Yes.
Community
Yes.
leadership
Yes.
was crucial.
Yes.
Churches
Yes.
were crucial.
Yes.
Everybody, what
Yes.
can we do now? We are at a point of crisis. What do we do now?
Bongani, then we had unity of purpose, but for whatever the reason is, we don't have that anymore. And I thought that this that we're facing as a country, this economic quagmire, being at the precipice, of a cliff, or being at the edge of a precipice, nearing the economic collapse, I thought that would have, drive us towards a singularity of purpose. But instead, when Finance Minister Tito Mboweni comes out with a plan to move this economy forward, then we're talking about process, right? To say that the right process wasn't followed. So it therefore begs the question for me to say that, do we even have the problem statement clearly defined? Do we understand that the window of opportunity for 57 million South Africans is actually closing? Do we understand that South Africa is not the only gateway to Africa and there's Kenya and other gateways, and we therefore need to shape up?
And not only are there other gateways to the rest of the continent, we ourselves are having difficulty getting in now because we've allowed other people to tell our story, even in terms of what's happened in recent days. What does all of this mean for South Africa's standing, forget the world stage, but just on the continent?
We are not beyond salvaging. You know, that is my view. We don't need to have the IMF walk in and dictate or take over our economic sovereignty, because that is actually what is going to happen. Because we are not there yet. We can still salvage this thing. But you see, Bongani, you need leadership. You know, I'm beginning more and more to think that you need somewhat an authoritarian leadership, you know, some kind of dictatorship, some kind of saying this is what is going to be done, and therefore
rights?
Not totally suspended, but you see, someone is going to have to provide leadership. Bongan, if you want to change things, you are not going to please everyone. And if you are pleasing everyone, you are not making enough progress. This government has got a responsibility to act in the best interest of 57 million South Africans, right? They are going to have to say, draw a line in the sand and say, what are the 2-3 things that we're actually going to have to implement to ensure that this happens? Irrespective of whether COSATU or civil society or business agrees, they have to show leadership and give direction. We can't live in this environment of uncertainty. We can't live in this state of paralysis. It just cannot be. Bongani, I'll rather have a leader that is strong and wrong rather than a leader that is weak and right. We need strong leadership. We need someone to lead the way.
We've had leaders that have been strong and wrong. We've had leadership that has been weak and right. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. What is your take on this? You can tweet us. Remember the hashtags. After the break, we'll, of course, give you the results of the poll, but we'll also meet Desiree Goodman, who's lived in a toxic industrialized part of Durban all her life. We'll hear her story coming up after the break. All right, through the Democracy Gauge, SABC News profiles a different South African, and we look at their assessment of the last 25 years of democracy. Today, we're in KZN and we meet Desiree Goodman, who's lived in an area of Durban that has massive pollution challenges.
Lindsay, bring my water for my tablets, please. When I get up in the morning, my medication is next to me. I start with my Astavin pump, which relieves me from stop breathing. I have a place in me where I stop breathing. So I have to take this Astavin. From the Astavin, I have to take my Fitsimbico, then my Theophylline, then the Nebs. And my name is Desiree Goodman. I live at 170F Hines Street. I have a chronic asthma disease. I have I'm under a pulmonologist at Albert Luthuli Hospital, where they supply me with my pumps and my nebs for my lead machine. I'm currently medically boarded. We have the stench past midnight. You can ask anybody. Past midnight, they let off that gas. It's every second night that we go through this year. And I feel it because I'm an asthmatic. This is killing me. It was clouded with gas here. I don't understand how they expected people to go through the gas to get to the ambulance. I still have pain on my lungs. Doctors diagnosed me now with the cancer of the colon. I'm still dizzy, but still a little bit dizzy. I was told by nurses that if I don't stop crying, they will take the drip off me and send me home. It is terrible. That's why you rather sit in your house and send somebody for your medication and treat yourself. If you die, you die. You do, you live below the breadline. They say, get a place, get out of the place. Unfortunately, we don't have money to relocate. I choose red because of democracy in this country. We are suffering with pollution. We battle to breathe here. We talk and nothing goes on a deaf ear. I think they'll be happy when we all be put in seal boxes and be put down in our graves. We have been ignored. It's like we don't exist.
Desiree chooses red. What have you chosen? Before we say goodbye, let's take a look at the results of our poll. And there they are coming up on your screen, the figures. It does appear that the Reds have it, a whopping 86% of you saying we do have a leadership crisis in this country. In fact, it is the Greens. It's in terms of how I'm framing the question in my head. In any case, that's what it is. Thank you for watching. I'm Bongani Bingwa. Until the next time, Ubusuku Benzolo. Good night.